This story is titled, I Almost Died in the Hospital and My Wife Didn't Care. She said, I'm not your babysitter. Handle it yourself. The moment I got discharged and found out what she was doing, I took my brutal revenge. Hey everyone, before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. So this happened over the course of 2 years, using fake names, on mobile, so sorry for formatting. Buckle up because this is going to be a long one. I, 34 male, had what I thought was a solid life before all this went down. I'm Mike, working as a financial analyst at a mid-sized investment firm. Nothing super exciting, but I busted my ass to get there coming from a blue-collar family where nobody went to college. Dad worked the railroad for 35 years. Mom waited tables at the same diner for most of my childhood. They scraped together enough for community college, and I fought my way up from there. Worked full-time while taking night classes, graduated with honors, and landed an entry-level position that I leveraged into something better. I played linebacker in high school, made All-State my senior year, had some small college offers, but chose the academic route instead. Kept hitting the gym 5 to 6 days a week even after. Not one of those Instagram fitness dudes posting shirtless selfies every day, but I could bench 280 and deadlift heavy. At my peak, I was 215 pounds at 6 feet 1 inch, about 12% body fat. Not bodybuilder territory, but solid and strong. Training was my therapy, something my wife Melissa, 32 female, never understood. She'd roll her eyes when I'd get up at 5 a.m. for workouts before heading to the office. Why do you need to be there so early? The weights aren't going anywhere, she'd mumble from under the covers. I'd just kiss her forehead and tell her to go back to sleep. Looking back, that was a sign. She never tried to understand the things that mattered to me. Met her at a friend's BBQ 6 years ago. She was way out of my league, honestly. Blonde, fit, perfect smile, the whole package. Worked in marketing for a luxury brand, always dressed impeccably, knew exactly what to say in any situation. The kind of woman who makes heads turn when she walks into a room. I fell hard. Proposed after a year. Our wedding was Pinterest perfect. Vineyard setting, 150 guests, her in a designer dress that probably cost more than my first car. My dad pulled me aside at the reception after having a few too many. Son, you sure about this one? She seems high maintenance. I laughed it off. Dad was old school. Didn't understand modern women, I told myself. Looking back, the red flags were waving like crazy. But you know how it is when you're wearing those rose-colored glasses. Like how she'd get irritated when I'd talk about budgeting for our future. Or how she'd subtly put down my family for being simple. Or the way she'd check out whenever I talked about work stress, but expected me to listen to every detail of her office drama. We had the suburban house with the open concept kitchen she insisted on renovating as soon as we moved in. Took vacations to Cabo every winter, where she'd spend hours getting the perfect beach photos while I just wanted to relax. We had the whole perfect couple social media presence. Her Instagram was filled with carefully staged photos of us looking blissfully happy. Funny how none of those pictures showed her face when I'd tell her I was too tired to go out with her friends on a work night. I honestly thought we were solid, though. Yeah, bedroom time had gotten less frequent, and maybe she was more interested in her phone than talking to me, but I figured that was just normal marriage stuff. We still had date nights, though she chose the restaurant every time. We still said I love you, though it was usually me saying it first. We still planned for the future, though her plans seemed to involve me making more money. God, I was such a fucking idiot. Now here is where everything goes to shit. It all started during busy season at work. I was pulling 60-hour weeks analyzing portfolio performances for our largest clients, staying late most nights, sometimes bringing work home on weekends. Melissa wasn't thrilled about it, but the overtime pay was good, and I was hoping for a promotion that would mean less grunt work in the future. About 3 weeks into this schedule, I started feeling off. Nothing major at first, just completely exhausted beyond normal tired, muscles aching like I'd destroyed myself at the gym, even though I'd been skipping workouts. Had a persistent headache that Advil wasn't touching. Started getting chills in the afternoon, even though it was warm outside. When I mentioned seeing a doctor to Melissa, she barely looked up from her phone. You're always looking for excuses to skip date night with my friends. Just take some Advil and man up. Maybe if you weren't at the gym every morning, you wouldn't be so tired. Classic her. Making everything about herself and low-key criticizing me in the process. I pushed through another week. Could barely finish half my normal gym routine without feeling like I was going to pass out. Started getting weird looks from coworkers when they'd see me sweating at my desk in an air-conditioned office. My boss even asked if everything was okay at home. I said I was fine, probably just fighting off a bug. Then the fever hit. Not your normal pop some NyQuil fever. The kind where you wake up with sheets completely soaked, feeling like your brain is cooking inside your skull. The kind where your joints hurt so bad you can barely move to get to the bathroom. I remember looking at the thermometer. 102.3. Not emergency room territory yet, but definitely doctor visit time. Melissa's response: just sleep in the guest room then. I have a presentation tomorrow and can't risk getting sick. There's some soup in the pantry if you want it. She didn't even check on me that night. I could hear her on the phone with her friend, laughing about something while I was shivering under 3 blankets in the guest room, too weak to get up and make that soup she'd so generously pointed out. I called the doctor's office the next morning, but they couldn't get me in until the following week. The nurse on the phone suggested urgent care if I felt worse. I decided to tough it out through the weekend. Big mistake. 3 a.m. on Sunday, I woke up and couldn't move my right side properly. My arm felt heavy, almost numb, and my leg wasn't responding right. The room was spinning, and my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I tried to stand up to go to the bathroom and collapsed halfway there, knocking over the nightstand. The noise must have woken Melissa because she came to the doorway, leaning against it with her arms crossed, not rushing to help me, not asking if I was okay, just standing there looking annoyed. Seriously? It's the middle of the night. I was on the floor, unable to get up, my speech slurring slightly as I tried to explain. I think something's really wrong. Can't feel my arm, right? Room's spinning. She sighed dramatically, like I'd asked her to drive me to the airport during rush hour. I'm not your mother, Mike. Handle it yourself. I have that client meeting at 9 a.m. and need my sleep. Then she went back to bed and closed the door. I lay there on the floor for probably 15 minutes, trying to get my body to cooperate. Finally managed to drag myself back to the bed and grab my phone. Couldn't focus enough to use the touchscreen properly, so I used voice commands to call my brother Ryan. He lives across town but made it to our house in 20 minutes. The look on his face when he saw me told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't me being a wimp. Something was seriously fucking wrong. Jesus Christ, Mike, he said, helping me sit up. Why didn't you call an ambulance? I remember mumbling something about insurance and costs. Ryan didn't waste any more time arguing, just helped me to his car. I couldn't walk straight, needed him practically carrying me. Melissa didn't even come out of the bedroom as we left. Ryan left a note for her saying he was taking me to Memorial Hospital's ER. The ER was absolute chaos. Saturday night, Sunday morning is apparently when all the drunks, fights, and car accidents happen. But one look at me, and the triage nurse called for a wheelchair immediately. My fever was now 104.5, blood pressure dangerously low, and by this point, I could barely stay conscious. Things moved quickly after that. Blood draws, IV lines, doctors firing questions at Ryan about my medical history that I was too out of it to answer. The words septic shock started being thrown around. Someone mentioned my kidneys were showing signs of distress. A neurologist was called to check my right-sided weakness. Ryan called Melissa again when they said they were admitting me to the ICU. Apparently, she'd finally read his note and texted him asking what was going on. He told her I was seriously ill, possibly septic, and was being moved to intensive care. Her response? Which hospital again? She showed up an hour later, yoga pants and full makeup, looking annoyed as hell, like she'd been called away from something important. By this point, I was hooked up to multiple IV antibiotics, fluids, and monitoring equipment. A nurse was placing a central line in my neck for medication delivery. You couldn't have picked a worse time for this, she muttered, not even looking at me as the nurses transferred me to a critical care bed. I have that campaign launching tomorrow. Is this going to take all day? Should I cancel my afternoon appointments? The ICU nurse, an older woman named Patricia, according to her badge, looked at Melissa like she'd grown a second head. Ma'am, your husband is critically ill. His infection has gone septic, which means it's in his bloodstream. He's going to be here for a while. Melissa looked put out by this information. She sat in the visitor's chair in the corner of the room, pulled out her phone, and proceeded to ignore everything happening around her. She stayed for about 30 minutes, scrolling through Instagram, while doctors explained I had a severe bacterial infection that had gone systemic. I was literally fighting for my life, and she was liking beach photos and commenting on her friend's new haircut. I have to go, she finally said, gathering her purse without even getting up to come closer to my bed. I'll check in tomorrow. Try not to be so dramatic with the doctors. They're busy people. Ryan was fuming. Are you fucking kidding me? He said after she left. You could die and she's worried about a fucking marketing campaign? I was too sick to process it. The infection was absolutely hammering my body. My organs were starting to fail. The doctors later told me my lactate levels, a measure of how badly your tissues are being deprived of oxygen, were through the roof. I drifted in and out of consciousness for the next 2 days. Ryan stayed as much as they'd let him, talking to doctors, calling our parents who lived 3 states away. Melissa visited once during those critical 48 hours, for 15 minutes, complained about the hospital parking and how the nurses had asked her too many questions when she arrived. She didn't touch me, didn't hold my hand, didn't show any sign she was concerned about her husband possibly dying. She did, however, take a selfie in the ICU waiting room that later showed up on her Instagram with the caption, "Tough times test us all," or "Prayers needed, Shaker's strong wife." I learned later that the nurses had started a betting pool on whether she'd show up again. One of them, a guy named Steve, who'd been taking care of me overnight, told Ryan, "In 15 years of ICU nursing, I've never seen a spouse so uninvolved when their partner is this sick. Usually, we have to force them to go home and rest." Day 3, I stabilized enough to be moved out of the ICU. Still very sick, but no longer in immediate danger of dying. Melissa's response when Ryan told her the news? "Great, so he'll be home soon?" No visit that day. She sent a text saying she was swamped at work, but would try to swing by tomorrow. My parents arrived that evening, having driven 14 hours straight to get there. My mom burst into tears when she saw me. Dad tried to keep it together but had to step out of the room for a few minutes. They asked where Melissa was. Ryan just shook his head, and they didn't push it. The next day, the infectious disease specialist figured out what was happening. I had developed a rare complication from strep throat. Yes, regular old strep throat that I probably thought was just a sore throat from being tired. The bacteria had gotten into my bloodstream and caused a condition called necrotizing fasciitis in my right shoulder muscle, which was why I couldn't move my arm properly. If Ryan hadn't gotten me to the hospital when he did, I would likely have lost the arm or died within hours. I needed surgery to remove the infected tissue. When the doctors asked for my next of kin to sign the consent forms, since I was still in and out of consciousness, Ryan had to explain that my wife was unavailable and my parents would need to sign. The surgeon's expression said it all. The surgery lasted 3 hours. They removed a significant chunk of muscle from my right shoulder, but managed to save full function of my arm. I would need extensive physical therapy, but I wasn't going to be permanently disabled. When I woke up in recovery, Ryan, Mom, and Dad were there. No Melissa. She sent flowers the next day. Not hand-delivered, had them sent from a delivery service with a card that said, "Get well soon. Miss you. Love, M." The nurses exchanged looks when they brought them in. I pretended not to notice. Day 5 in the hospital. Still weak as hell, but conscious and starting to understand how close I'd come to checking out. The antibiotics were working, the fever was down, and I could hold brief conversations without getting exhausted. My parents had gone to Ryan's place to rest, promising to come back for evening visiting hours. Melissa finally visited, dressed in a business casual outfit like she was heading to a lunch meeting, not to see her husband who almost died. She sat in the chair by the window, scrolling through her phone while half listening to the doctor, explained that I'd need extensive care during recovery. The infection had taken a massive toll on my body, significant muscle loss, potential heart and kidney issues to monitor, a long course of antibiotics, and daily wound care for the surgical site. "How long will that take?" she asked, finally looking up from her Instagram notifications. "I have that conference in Chicago next week, the one I told you about months ago. It's really important for my career." The doctor, to his credit, kept his expression neutral. "Mr. Thompson will need several weeks of recovery at home, followed by months of rehabilitation. He won't be able to work for at least 6 weeks, possibly longer. He'll need assistance with daily activities, wound care, and transportation to medical appointments." Melissa's face fell. "But I have that conference. And the charity gala the week after. Mike, you know how important those are." The doctor looked at me, then back at her. "Mrs. Thompson, your husband nearly died. His recovery needs to be the priority right now." After the doctor left, there was an uncomfortable silence. Melissa went back to her phone, occasionally sighing dramatically, like this whole situation was an inconvenience to her schedule. My mouth was dry from the medications. I tried to reach for the water cup on the tray table, but it was just out of reach. I was still so weak that my hands shook, and I'd already spilled water all over myself twice trying to drink on my own. "Melissa, could you hand me that water, please?" She looked up from her phone, visibly annoyed at the interruption. "Jesus, Mike, I'm not your nurse. Handle it yourself. You've got a call button right there." That's when I knew. 6 years of marriage, and my wife had less compassion for me than the night janitor who'd stopped by earlier to empty my trash and had taken the time to ask how I was feeling. Less concern for my well-being than the cafeteria worker who'd noticed I wasn't eating much and brought me extra Jell-O because you need to keep your strength up, honey. I just nodded and stayed silent. What was there to say? The actual nurse who came in later found me struggling to reach the water, helped me drink, checked my temperature, and adjusted my pillows. All while Melissa watched TikTok videos with the volume up. Your brother's here, the nurse said, and I've never been so relieved to see Ryan walk through a door. He took one look at the situation, me struggling to drink water, Melissa oblivious, and his face hardened in a way I'd never seen before. Ryan's usually the easygoing one in the family, the one who jokes and keeps things light, but in that moment, he looked like he wanted to throw Melissa's phone out the window. I need to talk to you in the hallway, he said to her, his voice tight with controlled anger. Don't know exactly what he said, but when they came back, she was quiet, subdued almost, and left shortly after, claiming she had a meeting she couldn't miss. Ryan stayed until visiting hours ended, helping me eat dinner, talking about nothing important, just being there. Bro, he said before leaving, his expression serious. I found something you should know about. Not the right time to tell you, but when you're stronger, we need to talk. How bad? I asked, already knowing from his face that whatever it was going to hurt. He squeezed my good shoulder gently. Focus on getting better first. I've got your back. You know that, right? I nodded, and he left. That night, for the first time since being admitted, I cried. Not from the pain, though there was plenty of that, but from the realization that the person who was supposed to love me the most in this world couldn't even be bothered to hand me a cup of water when I was too weak to reach it myself. Spent 12 days in that hospital. 12 days of fighting my way back. The infection had absolutely wrecked my body. Lost 22 pounds of mostly muscle, could barely walk to the bathroom without getting winded, and had to relearn basic shit like holding a fork without shaking. The physical therapist, a guy named Marcus, started working with me on day 6. He didn't sugarcoat things. This is going to be hard, Mike. You were in great shape before, which is probably what saved your life, but you've got a mountain to climb to get back there. We started with simple exercises, just lifting my arm, squeezing a stress ball, standing up from the bed without getting dizzy. It was humiliating, being reduced to celebrating these tiny victories. But Marcus was great, pushing me just enough without overdoing it. Your body's been through war, he explained. We need to respect that while challenging it to rebuild. Ryan was there every day. Parents flew in and stayed at his place, coming to the hospital daily. My boss called, assured me my job was secure, told me to focus on recovery. Work colleagues sent cards, food deliveries for my family, even a tablet loaded with movies and games to help pass the time. My high school buddy Dave drove 3 hours just to sit with me for an afternoon. Melissa visited 4 times total, 4 times in 12 days, while her husband recovered from nearly dying. Each visit shorter and more irritated than the last. She did bring me clean clothes once, though they were just thrown in a plastic bag, not even folded. The last visit, she stayed for 20 minutes and spent most of it complaining about how she'd had to reschedule her hair appointment because my mom had asked her to pick up some medical supplies for my discharge. I don't understand why your mom couldn't just order them online, she said, scrolling through her phone. It's not like I don't have my own life to deal with. I didn't respond, didn't have the energy for it, just focused on the exercises Marcus had taught me, trying to rebuild my strength one small movement at a time. The day before I was scheduled for discharge, Ryan finally told me what he'd discovered. He'd gone to our house to pick up more clothes for me and had used Melissa's laptop to print out my insurance information since mine was in the office and he couldn't find it. A message notification had popped up on screen. Can't wait for tonight. He still doesn't suspect anything. Bring that lingerie I like. It was from Jason, her gym trainer. Total stereotype. Tribal tattoos, tight shirts, always talking about his protein intake. Melissa had started working with him about 8 months ago, saying she needed to get more toned. Ryan, being the protective brother he is, dug deeper. Found hundreds of messages going back months. Pictures, hotel receipts, explicit conversations about their meetups, including in our house, in our bed. There's more, Ryan said quietly, his voice heavy. In some of the messages, she talks about you. Says you're weak, too emotional, not man enough for her, that she needs a real man who doesn't bore her with talk about retirement accounts and budgets. He pulled out his phone, showed me screenshots he'd taken. There it was in black and white. My wife complaining about me to her lover, making fun of how I'd gotten soft and boring since we got married, saying she settled for financial stability, but needed excitement elsewhere. But the worst part? The most recent messages were from when I was in the ICU. While I was fighting for my life, they were meeting at our house. In our fucking bed. Sorry to hear about Mike, Jason had written. But since he's in the hospital, does that mean you're free tonight? Her response, definitely. Ryan's staying there playing the protective brother. So the house is empty. Bring wine. I knew you needed to know, Ryan said, putting his phone away. But I wanted to wait until you were stronger. There's more evidence at home. I took pictures of everything before she could delete it. I wasn't angry. Not yet. That would come later. In that moment, I just felt clarity. Like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place, showing the complete picture of my marriage for the first time. 6 years of making excuses for her behavior, of convincing myself that her coldness was just her way, that her disinterest in my life was normal. I need your help, I told Ryan. I'm not going back to that house. He nodded. Already working on it. Mom and Dad are with me on this. We've got you. Later that night, when the nurse came to check my vitals, she asked if I was okay. My blood pressure was elevated. Just found out my wife's been cheating on me, I said, too exhausted to sugarcoat it. She patted my hand. While you've been in here? Honey, that's not a wife. That's a placeholder until the right woman comes along. The plan came together fast. While Melissa thought I was being discharged the next day, the doctors actually wanted me to stay one more night for observation. That gave us 24 hours to get everything in order. Ryan called our buddy Steve, who's a lawyer. We played football together in high school, and he'd gone on to become a pretty successful divorce attorney. Steve came to the hospital that night with paperwork ready, power of attorney so Ryan could handle my affairs while I recovered, documentation for the bank to secure my personal accounts, and preliminary divorce paperwork. Don't confront her yet, Steve advised, his expression serious. Not until you're stronger and have everything in order. She's shown you who she is. Believe her. I signed everything. My hand still shaky, but the signature legible enough. Steve promised to file the paperwork first thing in the morning. Mike, I've seen a lot of divorce cases in my time, he said before leaving. But this is cold, man. You deserve better. The next morning, while Melissa was supposedly at work, but according to her phone location was actually at Jason's apartment, yes, Ryan had checked. Ryan and our cousins Tim and Eric went to the house. They only took what was undeniably mine: clothes, personal items, my grandfather's watch collection, my diplomas and awards, and important documents. Ryan set up a small apartment near his house where I could recover. First floor, accessible bathroom, walking distance to a park, for when I was strong enough for outdoor exercise. Mom stocked the kitchen with healthy foods to help me rebuild strength. Dad set up the bedroom with a proper adjustable bed better for my recovery than a standard mattress. Tim, who works in IT, made sure I had a good internet connection and a laptop set up so I could eventually work from home. Eric, who does construction, installed grab bars in the bathroom so I wouldn't fall during showers. When Melissa found out I'd been discharged to Ryan's care instead of coming home, she was pissed. Not worried, not concerned, pissed. Why would you do that without telling me? I'm your wife. I had everything ready for you here. That was the first direct lie. Ryan had been to the house. Nothing had been prepared. My side of the closet was full of her yoga gear. The guest room where I'd been sleeping before the hospital still had dirty sheets. The refrigerator contained 3 bottles of white wine, some yogurt, and takeout leftovers. Nothing for someone recovering from a major illness. I texted back a simple reply. I need time to get stronger. Staying with Ryan for now. Her response was telling, is your family turning you against me? Not, are you okay? Or, what do you need? Just immediately assuming I was being manipulated rather than making my own decision. For 2 weeks, I focused only on recovering. Physical therapy in the mornings, protein-heavy meals to rebuild muscle, short walks that got longer each day, proper rest, medications, and zero contact with Melissa except for brief, factual texts. She swung between anger, you're being ridiculous, just come home, manipulation. I've been so worried about you. Don't you care how this affects me? People are asking questions. And fake concern for social media. Asking for prayers for my husband's continued recovery. Blessed hard wife life. Her Instagram told a very different story than reality. While I was learning how to do basic tasks again, she was posting about holding down the fort and taking care of everything while my man recovers. The reality? She hadn't even asked what medications I was on. Meanwhile, Ryan had hired a PI who documented multiple rendezvous between Melissa and Jason. The PI also found evidence of a second guy, one of the partners at her marketing firm. Apparently, I wasn't man enough for her, but she needed 2 replacements. Steve was building a rock-solid divorce case. In our state, adultery doesn't automatically give you better terms in a divorce, but abandonment during a medical crisis combined with misuse of marital funds. She'd been buying her boyfriend's gifts with our joint account definitely strengthened my position. By the end of those 2 weeks, I'd made significant progress. Could walk around the block without getting winded. Could lift light weights with my good arm. The surgical wound was healing well. And most importantly, my mind was clear. The fog of illness and medication had lifted, and I could think strategically again. The day I finally felt strong enough, I called her and asked to meet at a coffee shop near Ryan's place. I picked a public location deliberately, both for witnesses in case she made a scene, and because I didn't trust myself to be alone with her in my apartment. Not because I'd hurt her, but because I wasn't sure I could stay strong if she turned on the waterworks. She showed up looking perfect as always. Designer jeans, expensive blouse, hair and makeup flawless. But her eyes widened when she saw me. I was still 15 pounds down from my normal weight, the surgical scar visible above the collar of my shirt, but I'd started looking healthy again. And more importantly, my eyes were clear. No more brain fog, no more weakness. Just clarity and purpose. "What is this dramatic exit about?" she demanded, sitting down across from me. "You nearly die and then decide to blow up our marriage? Are you having some kind of breakdown? Because this behavior is not normal, Mike." I studied her face. This woman I'd loved for 6 years, who I'd planned a future with, who couldn't be bothered to help me drink water when I was too weak to help myself, who'd fucked another man in our bed while I was fighting for my life in the ICU. Without a word, I slid a folder across the table. Inside were the PI's photos, screenshots of text messages, hotel receipts, and credit card statements showing gifts she'd bought for her boyfriends with our joint account. On top was a particularly damning text exchange from the day I'd gone into septic shock, where she'd complained to Jason that my neediness was interfering with their plans. Her face went white as she flipped through the evidence. I sat silently, letting her see it all. The secret credit card she'd opened in my name, the hotel charges, the texts mocking me, calling me weak, boring, not man enough, the conversations planning their meetups while I was hospitalized. "I know everything," I said calmly when she finally looked up. "I filed for divorce. You'll be served tomorrow. Your stuff will be packed and moved to storage by the end of the week. The house is going on the market." Her face went through a fascinating series of expressions: shock, anger, calculation, and finally an attempt at seduction. She reached for my hand across the table. "Mike, baby, I made a mistake. I was stressed and scared with you being so sick. It didn't mean anything. We can work through this. Maybe see a counselor?" I pulled my hand away. "You fucked another man in our bed while I was in the ICU with organ failure. Then you fucked your boss while complaining to your friends that I was milking my illness for attention. There's no working through that." She switched tactics instantly, her eyes hardening. "You've been so distant. Always at work or the gym. What was I supposed to do? You barely touched me for months. And then you get sick and expect me to be Florence Nightingale? I'm not built for that." "You're right," I said, standing up. "You're not built for it. That's why I'm leaving. The man you thought was too weak to leave you just did." I walked out, leaving her sitting there with the folder of evidence. Ryan was waiting in the car outside. "How'd it go?" "Exactly as expected," I said. She tried excuses, then seduction, then blame shifting. Classic Melissa playbook. That night, the text started. First pleading, then angry, then threatening. She'd been served the divorce papers that afternoon. According to Steve, she'd torn them up in front of the process server, as if that would make them invalid. "You can't do this to me," she wrote. I made one mistake. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The divorce was ugly, as expected. Melissa tried everything, claiming I was mentally unstable from the sepsis, that I'd been emotionally abusive, that I'd abandoned her. The judge wasn't impressed, especially when we submitted the hospital security footage, showing her scrolling through Instagram while doctors explained my critical condition. The texts between her and her boyfriends, discussing my weakness while I was hospitalized, were the final nail. The judge awarded me the majority of our assets, and Melissa got hit with my medical bills. Karma's first delivery. Meanwhile, Melissa's carefully constructed life was unraveling spectacularly. Her affair with Jason became public when his wife found out and went nuclear on social media, tagging their workplace, friends, and family. Turns out, Jason was married the whole time, and his wife had discovered the affair when she found receipts for jewelry he'd bought Melissa with their joint credit card. Ironic, right? Melissa's marketing firm didn't appreciate the scandal, especially when they discovered she'd also been sleeping with one of the partners. She was asked to resign, lost the fancy title, the expense account, and the status that came with working for a prestigious agency. Jason dumped her immediately, of course, begged his wife for forgiveness, claimed Melissa had pursued him aggressively, and he'd made a terrible mistake. The partner at her firm was already engaged to someone else and denied everything, claiming Melissa was unstable and making things up for attention. I watched it all unfold from a safe distance, neither gloating nor intervening. Our divorce had been finalized by then, and I had moved on with my life. But mutual friends still filled me in on the highlights, and occasionally I'd see updates on social media from people we both knew. But karma wasn't done yet. About a year after our divorce, while Sarah, my new girlfriend, and I were moving into our new house, an upgrade from my post-divorce apartment with enough room for her home office and my expanded home gym, Ryan called me. "Dude, you won't believe this," he said. "Melissa just got fired from her new job. Turns out she'd been bad-mouthing her boss to colleagues, not realizing the boss's assistant was in earshot. The same boss who'd taken a chance on her despite the scandal at her previous job. The assistant, who'd been growing increasingly frustrated with Melissa's entitled attitude, recorded the conversation on her phone and played it for the boss. Melissa was escorted out that day. With no job, mounting debt from her lavish lifestyle that she'd maintained despite the reduced income, and a reputation in tatters, Melissa started reaching out to mutual friends, spinning a story about how she'd made a terrible mistake and wanted to apologize to me. "She's trying to rehab her image," my friend Chris told me over beers. "Keeps telling everyone she was going through a mental health crisis during your illness, that she wasn't herself, that she's gotten help, and wants to make amends." I ignored it, too busy living my life with Sarah to care about Melissa's redemption tour. We were planning a trip to Yellowstone, something I'd always wanted to do, but Melissa had vetoed because there weren't enough luxury hotels and Instagram opportunities. Sarah and I were going to camp in a tent, hike during the day, and stargaze at night. The kind of authentic experience Melissa would have hated. But then the text started. First to Ryan, then to my work email, then from unknown numbers when I blocked the previous ones. "I miss you. I made the biggest mistake of my life. You were always the strong one. I see that now. Please, just coffee. Let me explain. I'm a different person now. I've grown. I'm in therapy and understanding my patterns." The last one made me laugh out loud. The only pattern Melissa needed to understand was her fundamental selfishness, her inability to see others as anything but props in the movie of her life. Ryan suggested I get a restraining order, but it hadn't quite reached that level of harassment yet. Besides, I knew Melissa well enough to know that she'd eventually get bored with the rejection and move on to another target. Her attention span for anything that didn't immediately gratify her was remarkably short.